One. Okay, so we'll start with PJs, and PJs cognitive developmental theory. And the mnemonics that I tell people to remember the stages on, which are super easy to recall during the exam. Stupid PJ creates fuss, and some people can fly. Sensory motor, operational, concrete, operational, formal. So stage 1 is the sensory motor, and that's ages 0 to 2. And this looks at how thought processes function within the use of symbols, meaning the way that they understand their environment is based on objects and what they're actually sensing. So motor connectivity without the use of symbols, basically it's all learned through experience. And some peoples can carry this out into adulthood, such as visual learners. Those people that are visual learners are the use of symbols when making experience. So the main goal here is object permanence, and this is knowing something is there even when it's out of sight. And such examples we typically see with young children. Peekaboo, you put a ball under a blanket and they'll be like, where's the ball? But as they progress on and get older, they know that the ball is under the blanket. So it's less fun to play with kids when they have object permanence. So super fun when they when they don't, because then you can just like, oh my God, where's this and where's that? So it's like a magic trick all the time. As well as what it will also look like is when their parent leaves the room, they have a conscious thought of like, oh, they're not gone forever. They're gone. I'm still a little anxious and ticked off that they're not around me, but I know that they're ultimately going to come back. And then like key components are like body movement, meaning they'll utilize their bodies as well as their senses to identify what's going on in their environment. Is it dangerous? Is it not dangerous? What's actually going on? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it not? Things like that. And then when we look at this, a lot of it is also going to be based on running around rooms, touching, feeling things. So you'll see little kids, they'll be like, man, what's this? They'll pick it up. And that's so they can get experience. So a lot of parents, they spite their kids' experience and learning because they don't let them explore, given there's dangerous situations where you wouldn't want them to. However, that is what we're looking at here. In 2 scenarios to remember the stage, depending on what type of imagery you want to have, is like imagine yourself walking into a room with a baby in her crib. The baby's playing with its feet and looking around. In the same room, picture a child running around making engine sounds with their toy car. So the symbolization of the baby in the crib playing with its feet is that it's getting a sense of the environment by touching its feet. Therefore, them touching their feet is the use of their senses, which makes us think of the sensey part of the name, sensory motor. And the young child running around making motor sounds is the name of the motor, so sensory motor. One a little more relevant to those that drive and had car trouble, which I know I did a couple weeks ago, which kind of sucked, is like imagine yourself driving around in your car and you hear a sound coming from the engine or the motor. You'll use your senses to try to understand what's going on in the environment. You might turn the radio down and say what's going on. So senses, so the sensey, and then the motor sound is for the motor to recall that stage. And remember, this is all about the senses getting experience based on their environment. Stage number 2, which is the pre-operational, and think about this is before they're able to actually do operations. So it's all based on symbolic around objects. So during the stage, the child can start to use some type of imagery. And this is their ability to make one thing, such as a word, object, or experience, stand for something other than the object. You see this all the time. You hear like a theme song to like a favorite cartoon, they get wild and they look for their character. Or they hear like the ice cream truck and they instantly think, yep, I'm getting ice cream. Or you take them past the McDonald's and they're like, oh gosh, I'm getting McDonald's. And you're like, no, that's just us driving. Or they see an M, or they see a clown and they think that's Ronald McDonald. So it's a lot of situational as well as like comparison thing. And us using symbols to study for the exam is also very relevant in this stage too. It's helping us get operational around concepts. However, in this, their thinking is very egocentric, so it's about themselves without considerations of others. They make it difficult to take the perspective of other people. So like if a kid's in the grocery store and it wants a piece of candy and it asks, hey, can I have this? The parent may say no, and the kid may get wild. But the parent's saying, hey, you can't have that because we're going to get dinner soon. But it's getting wild because it wants it and cannot take the perspective of the parents and understand why it can't have it. This is where we see a lot of tantrums within the stores and stuff like that. And then this is where they start to develop a sense of language, memory, and imagination within the experiences that they have. They can start to describe things, start to recall things, as well as begin to picture things how they would like them to be, such as let's play house, let's play doctor, stuff like that. And then the intelligence or the thought processes are both egocentric. Again, that is them just thinking about themselves. And then intuitive, meaning that they can believe something based on their feelings, even if there's zero chance of it actually being realistic. Which leads us into the two concepts that are very up that alley of magical thinking. So someone that's using magical thinking is super intuitive and or delusional if it processes and continues on to like a disorder level, such as we see in schizophrenia. So magical thinking is like the idea that one's thoughts or desires influence the environment and situation that they're involved in. The person thinks that they have way more influence than they actually do within the environment or their situation, or an object does. So an example is like a child may think their nightlight will keep monsters away. So their belief in monsters is that they can have an imagination, and then the nightlight is magically thought or amplified to have all-knowing power beyond the stream of light. Magically thought, like, wow, this nightlight has some superpower. Another example is that a child believes that they don't want their brother or sibling around, and then their sibling ends up in the hospital. They're like, oh my God, my thought of them not wanting to be around made that happen. They believe that they have way more power than they actually do. And then the symbolic functioning, which is another key milestone within this stage, is when a child learns through the use of mental images and other symbols that are not present. Therefore, like if a child is seeing someone getting serenaded or sang to bed, they may start singing to their bear to put him to sleep. Whether that is actually true or not, it's up to the child. However, they start to exhibit things that aren't actually real for the sake of them seeing someone else do it. Such as a child may play doctor to a bear that fell off the bed when they saw someone fall off a bed and have to go to the hospital. Or this is where kids may start using objects around the house to think they're quote unquote cleaning. They see one of their parents cleaning the house with something that's liquid. They may go in the kitchen, grab some ketchup, put it on the ground and start wiping it around saying like, look, I'm helping clean. They symbolically have thought that this is an object for memory and recall, but entirely untrue. So scenarios to remember this stage is like, imagine you're babysitting a child and they're pretending to be a nurse to cure a broken leg on their doll that fell off the bed earlier. The use of symbolic function in imaginary play. They're imagining that their doll is real. The symbolic thing is that they're playing doctor even though there's no doctor. They're utilizing something that they've seen prior. And then the second example to exhibit the second milestone of magical thinking is imagine you're the person in the first scenario that had car trouble. The person begins to think that if they are nicer to their significant other that morning, that their car wouldn't have broken down. Or another example, let's say somebody goes into their LCSW exam, since the majority of you guys are taking that exam, I'll use that one. And they pass. And they're like, oh my God, I passed because I bought someone coffee before I got here. You passed, which is great, but the reasoning behind it is not entirely true. And you should give your side go self-credit for passing rather than magically thinking that was the reason you passed. So the third stage is concrete operational. So the child begins to develop a logical or remote operational type thinking. So think of concrete, objects create things, concrete is construction, and you're constructing some type of thought processing. So they can only apply to objects though, however. So the child can work out things in their head rather than having to directly experiencing something. Meaning Phil can look at the wall and say, wow, that's probably really hard. I don't have to run into it and put my body through it to be like, yeah, that's pretty durable. Or see like a sharp knife and say, wow, I wonder how sharp that is. I don't just wipe it across my arm and cut my hand off and say, wow, that was really sharp. I can look at it and say, probably not a good idea to test this. So they start to have some like cause and effect type mentality, which just helps them to actually begin to start playing games with real rules because they can make a connection of why they're actually in place. And an example of this is like if I get angry and punch a wall, it could hurt my hand, so I'm not going to punch a wall. However, when people get angry, they kind of lose their rational thinking mindset. Another example is if people do not take turns, then the game is no fun. Meaning if someone got to take all of the turns of the game, there would be no point of them actually playing the game because it's cheating. And the two main milestones here is conservation and classification. Conservation, think of like rainforest conservation, meaning if we have to rescue animals, it's not changing the actual count of the animals, it's just diverting it to a different place. Meaning it's being able to identify properties of categories rather than having to see it in a whole and it getting split. Ability to critically think and construct things. Like the understanding that something stays the same in quantity, even if its appearance changes or it diverts away. The most common example you probably hear and that is played out is the water bottle example. Meaning, if I had this little dinky water bottle and put it into this big water bottle, we are going to see a lot of different quantity. You're going to say, holy crap, there's none in this one. When if we put it into this one, you're like, wow, you have a lot of water, depending on the perspective of what you're looking at here. So that is being able to look at something and say, wow, that image changed, but it's not like, oh my God, it's totally different quantities. You'd say, no, it's probably comparable. Another example is, let's say we have 6 rows of 2 pennies, so we have 12 pennies total. Let's say somebody wanted to mix the game up and we had 2 rows of 6. We would still have 12 pennies. Even though it looks different, the quantity didn't change. Or going back to my conservation of rainforest, let's say we had 5 wolves in one forest. Let's say we move 3 over here and have 2 at this other forest. We would still have 5 wolves. It didn't change. We just molded it to what worked best. The other one is classification. And if you think of the word class, it's like category, like different subjects. And that is exactly what we're doing here, is the ability to identify different properties or categories related to each other. Like the ability to identify similarities as well as the ability to difference amongst different objects. So for example, let's say we had a collection of objects. We had 1 red cat, 1 blue cat, 1 black cat. We had 1 red flower, 1 black flower, and 1 blue flower. If we wanted to separate them up, we could. We could say, let's be able to categorize them into all cats and all flowers, meaning the red, blue, and black cat would be in one category, and then the red flower, black flower, and blue flower would be in its additional category. So 2 different categories. Let's say we wanted to categorize them into colors. We would separate the red cat with the red flower, the black cat with the black flower, and the blue flower with the blue cat. So with that, that is how you classify or categorize them accordingly. But prior to this stage, they're not able to do that. They would just say, oh, these all look the same. All right, let's clump them together. So that is where it gets kind of classical, meaning we need to classify the difference in, remember, concrete, operational. So scenarios to remember this stage: imagine that you see a group of children playing with some concrete blocks. One of them throws a block at the ground and yells, "Be careful, I'm on a mission and do not want anyone to get an operation." And all of the kids disperse and run away. The name concrete operational is exhibited here, meaning concrete blocks. So the word concrete, blocks, and the word operation. So concrete operational, as well as they can see the danger when it comes to the object. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get out of here. This concrete block shard could hit me. So they run away. Remember, they're able to make causal actions based on objects. Second little example is imagine kids playing and they accidentally break a block into pieces and try to put them together. And a parent yells at them, "You better fix this or you will get an operation." So the word operation, again, to represent concrete operational and concrete again. So this is an example of conservation as well, meaning when the block broke, they tried putting it back together. So they were trying to conserve the different categories of the block together. They didn't just say, oh, wow, those are different block shards. They're like, nope, they go together. So then the fourth stage is formal operations, and that's 11 on to adolescence. And what is happening in this stage? Think about formal. Somebody is starting to develop a form about themselves and start to get professional. So the person is able to think about abstract concepts, so concepts that aren't distinct in front of them, and they're able to decipher and analyze different patterns of thought and make connections otherwise that wouldn't be there, such as, if this happens, then this. So it's their ability to plan for the future, meaning I have KSA study group every Saturday from 6 to 8. I know that I need to plan things either before and or after it. So if I have an appointment at 3 to 4, I have 2 hours to prep. However, if I had an appointment from 4 all the way until 6, Bill would have 0 time to prep. So it'd be my way to be like, oh, wow, okay, I'm going to feel rushed and pressured, so I probably shouldn't do that. So you're able to think hypothetically, which the fancy term they like whipping out on us is hypothetical deductive reasoning. So that's the ability to think abstractly through generating predictive measures of hypothesis. Said in more simple terms, if this, then this. Meaning, if I do study group from 6 to 8, I will not be able to spend time with friends. Or if I spend $20, then I will have 40 and wouldn't be able to buy something that's 60. Sacrificial, different properties. So the considerations here is it's being able to think through a situation and come up with a solution to decide on a better outcome rather than impulsive, just pulling the trigger whenever we want to type things. And it's thinking through life decisions and allows for a pros and cons list to identify physically or cognitively different options and drawbacks. So the scenarios to remember here is imagine someone preparing for formal dance and they think of how they want to go with Susan. However, if they go with Susan, they will likely have to meet at her house and take pictures with all the family before leaving. Therefore, he would have to decide whether it is worth it to go with Susan or not. If I go with Susan, then I'll have to take a lot of pictures. And that leads up to pros and cons. If the person doesn't entirely like pictures, they're probably not going to go with Susan. However, if they like Susan enough, they can take a bajillion pictures even though they hate it. Number 2, someone wants to buy a video game from the store that costs $50. The child knows that they can get $25 from their parents each week if they do their chores. Therefore, if they do their chores for 2 weeks, they can get their game. Being able to actually plan it out rather than someone that's younger that's just spending their money and not understanding why they're not able to buy everything in sight. And the mnemonic to remember the different age ranges here The first one is stage 1, which is 0 to 2. So stage 1 is between 0 and 2 when it ends, meaning stage 1 is between 0 and 2, the ages of when it starts, and it ends at 2. Or another little one, it takes 2 years for a social worker to come to their senses to be fully licensed. That utilizes the 0 to 2, as well as senses for sensory motor. Stage 2, 2 to 7, starts at 2 and takes until 7 to become operational for concrete, for pre-operational. And then C, stage 3, 7 to 11, requires that we pay a fee at our local 7-Eleven made out of concrete for concrete operational. Stage 4 starts at 11 and goes until forever. So we open the door for our date around 11 at the formal dance. Formal dance for formal operational. So different forms of adaptation to new stimuli. So we have assimilation and accommodation. And those that have been rocking with me before have seen this prior, but the SS and CC. SS stands for stays the same, CC for client changes. So assimilation is adding a new idea, behavior, activity into the person's life, and their identity is not lost or changed based on the new ideology. Meaning, if you start doing something new, it doesn't entirely change your identity. It's just something to supplement or additional. Meaning, if you start doing my study groups and stuff and you just basically use my stuff as supplemental to what you're currently doing, or you start doing my study groups and stuff and you basically eliminate everything else and use mine as primary, that would be more of accommodation. So that's a way to differentiate those two. And examples to drive it further home is that a chef learns a new recipe. Even though the new recipe is a stimuli in his life, it doesn't change that he's a particular chef. Another example, someone passes their LCSW exam, yet still hangs out with their other friends, meaning pass your LCSW, it branches you into a licensed clinical social worker, but you still hang out with friends from other disciplines rather than just accompanying yourself with just social workers. Another example is a person begins taking yoga classes, yet still continues all of their normal activities. The client began yoga, which is the new stimulus, and it, however, it doesn't make up their identity. Conversely, if they wanted to start doing yoga and they adapted their entire life around yoga, that would be more of accommodation. Which accommodation is changing or altering current schemas, thought process, fancy term for, in a new response to information. So someone gets new information, a behavior activity, and they change who they are based on the new stimulus. So examples of this to drive it home. Someone believes that all dogs are bad since they had bad experience when they were a child. When they get older, they had a good interaction with the dog and it changed their schema to believe not all dogs are bad, just some of them. The accommodation factor here is the change in perspective of the dogs due to a new experience. The second one, child knows that clowns have red hair. So when they see someone with the red hair, they believe it is a clown. However, with exposure to people who have red hair, they begin to realize not everyone with red hair is a clown. The accommodation factor here is they went from thinking everyone had red hair is a clown, which is the beginning, to knowing not everyone who has red hair is a clown. They're able to make that distinction and separation there. The third one, it's more relevant to me, is Phil begins making YouTube videos and offering individual tutoring to people who are struggling to pass their ASWB exam. Phil begins to cut out watching sports on weekends to form study groups to reach more people. So the accommodation factor would be the cutting out of sports to host study groups since part of his identity was changed. any questions on PJ or any of that theory at this time? So we have one no. And if you don't, just type no into the chat so I know. 2, 3. Okay. So feel free to unmute yourself, Nadine, and we can wrap it out. Good. Good to hear it to you. I'm glad.
So in the pre-operational stage, I just missed something that you said the child develops a sense of language and two other things. I just couldn't remember them.
Memory and imagination.
Oh, memory and imagination. And also, I didn't get the email.
Oh. So give me 1 second. All right. So the next theory we're looking at is Kohlberg's theory of moral development. 6 stages, 3 levels, kind of wonkily organized. So bear with me as we peel through it. So level 1 is the pre-conventional morality, and this is before age 9 years old. The ages here is kind of super weird because once you get to a certain level, not everyone reaches the level, so there's no real age cutoff on some of these. However, stage 1, obedience and punishment orientation. And this is where the child behaves in a good manner to avoid being punished. And if the person's punished, they must have done something wrong. Punishment here is not just off the cuff or off the rip, and people are like, oh, why is that person being punished? How dare they? You know what I mean? It's like, oh, that person was deviant in some way. So examples of this would be like a fourth grade year old girl refrains from running the hall in order to avoid breaking any school rules. She knows that it's not appropriate to do so and doesn't want to be punished, so she walks anyhow. So a young boy will behave himself in a store to avoid being yelled at by his mother, acts up or cuts up while in a store, probably going to get punished pretty heavily. Third one, a young child will behave themselves at their relative's house to avoid getting their iPad taken from them. They do not want to have punishment, so regardless of what their impulse is telling them, they keep it at bay, and they just want to be loved. Stage 2, individualism and exchange. And this is where the child will recognize there is more than one way of doing something correctly and often will cling on to the response handed down to them by a figure of authority. So they're not really individuals, they're more of a collective of what they know and what they've seen. And this thing is where different individuals have different rules that they want you to follow, meaning if I'm at my grandma's house, it's going to be different than my aunt's house, and it's going to be way different than my parents' house. So I have to know my environment and be able to adapt to it. And no one has really a set rule, and it's all based on their own experience, values, and views on what is appropriate. So some environments you could get the switch or like a spanking or something, and other times it's like, wow, you're sitting in a corner. And then it's like, wow, what do I do? And then the interest begins to shift to the reward system rather than to avoid punishment. So this is where kids start to think, wow, what is my best possible reward that I can get? And they conform to their rules and principles to benefit themselves. The kid may not understand or actually appreciate or think the rules are for them. They just do it so they can get rewarded. Basically, the phrase that we've heard for the longest time is, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Meaning, I'll behave if I get this reward when I get home. You'll see that a lot of times. Well, if you behave, I'll let you get ice cream. Kids, straight up the best person you've ever seen. And this is just so that they can get the reward that they want. So 3 examples. A child may help out their parents doing dishes, even though they don't like doing them, to have their friends stay the night. Second one, someone may not want to study for their exam. However, they know if they do so, they'll have a higher likelihood of passing, which leads them to getting their license. The third one, someone may watch a movie with their significant other, even though they don't like it, to make them happy. Doing things just so that they can get a reward. Level 2 is the conventional morality, and this is most adolescents and adults. And what we're looking at here is the person begins to internalize the moral standards or values of the people they consider significant in their life. And authority is internalized but not questioned, and reasoning is based on the norms of the group in which the person identified with. Meaning, this is where someone starts to get acquainted to who and where they're at and what is appropriate in each environment. And they know that they need to act a certain way to fit in. This is in a different theory, the identity versus role confusion type thinking. So this is where we go to stage 3, the conformity and interpersonal accord / good relationship. So this is where the person or individual is good or falls into a specific societal expectations, so that way they can be seen as a good person by others, and they seek the approval of others based on their actions. Meaning they'll say, wow, look at this cool thing that I did. Isn't this great? Or, wow, isn't this a great study group so far? And then I'd be looking for people to confirm and affirm me type deal. And this is so that people can be quote on seen as a good girl or good boy, meaning doing things to get acceptance. So effort is put forth to seek and secure approval or maintain friendly relations with other people. Whether this is positive or maladaptive is begs the question. Meaning, wow, if you don't smoke cigarettes, you can't hang out with us. Well, sometimes people in a healthier dichotomy would say, no, I'm not going to do that anyway. People that are more moldable would be like, yeah, let's start smoking, type deal. So 3 examples to exemplify this is stealing is bad, and if I steal, then my friends will consider me a bad person and not like me. Meaning social acceptance overrides individualism and what they feel and think themselves. The second one, someone may think drinking and driving is a bad behavior, so they avoid doing it to ensure people do not consider them a bad person. Third one, I feel unmotivated to study for my ASWB exam, but people I hang around study, so I study to avoid being rejected by them. We see this a lot of times in our study preps. You may feel unmotivated and people aren't talking about feeling unmotivated, so you mask it and say, wow, I'm motivated and I'm 100% on point, even though silently you're like, bro, can someone say that it's okay to be unmotivated? But we suppress it so that way we can be accepted in certain social groups. Stage 4, authority and order. The child or individual becomes more aware of the wider rules of society. So judgment is concerned with obeying the rules in order to uphold social order and avoid guilt of breaking the rules. Orientation or conduct begins to shift towards fixed rules. The purpose of morality is obtaining the social order, meaning whatever society thinks overrides what I think, and I need to obey the rules because, quote unquote, rules are rules. So examples that kind of paint the picture better than these words are, I'm personally against violence, but would never protest at the library without permission because it's frowned upon. I'm not just going to roam up into a silent place and start shouting my life away. Second one, I'm personally against the attendance policy at work. I have something to do. I want to go to my friend's party that he graduated, and boss won't let me, so I'm going to cut out of work, but I still check with my boss anyways before violating. So I kind of tell on myself because I feel bad because quote unquote rules are rules. Third one, I am late for work and feel pressured to speed, but since it is against the law, I continue to drive the speed limit. And then I end up being late for work anyhow. So level 3, post-conventional morality. And this is the higher thought process. And this is where not a lot of people end up getting to. So what does it actually look like and mean? So stage 5, social contract and individual rights. So this is when the individual becomes aware that while rules are important and exist for the greater number of people, there are times when they go against the interests of particular people. Such as since some laws and rules are against the interests of particular people, actions are needed to dissemble the injustice, meaning most issues are not clear cut and one size does not fit all, meaning if one thing benefits the majority of people, but there's a group of people it's oppressing or discriminating against, we kind of need to push back on that. But the big thing to hear is, there's mutual benefit for everybody and reciprocity for the person that's doing the good action. So morally right and legal does not always equate to the same thing, which leads us to doing Altarian rules, which basically makes everything equal and better for everyone rather than just for certain particular people. And the person genuinely has an interest in the welfare for others and concern with individual rights and being morally correct. So those that have heard about Schindler during World War II, but those that haven't, a brief synopsis of this is Schindler was a guy that owned a war supply factory. He started hiring Jewish people to help save them from concentration camps. Morally, he was like, we can't just let these people go into concentration camps and die. But he was also benefiting because he was getting some sense of pride as well as camaraderie as well as income from the transactions. But he was ultimately doing this because he's like, the overall good of people are not being benefited here, and this one particular group of people is perishing and actually getting exploited and exterminated on its face. Two less paramount, but still relevant to social work, is a social worker seeing someone that isn't scheduled to ensure they are stable. Yes, it is against some agency policy to see people off the chart and off of office time. However, when someone's life is at stake, you kind of need to take the extra little time. So even though it's against what the overall number of people would benefit from, you still benefited a particular group of people that otherwise would not have gotten their needs met. Third example, someone doesn't have enough food to eat and a restaurant worker gives them extra food even though it is against the rules. This person could have lost their job for just giving out company food, but they felt like they could benefit a small number of people at the cost of the majority. So that is what that vision looks like. And then the last stage, or the sixth stage of universal principles, is the rare stage for anyone to touch and breathe on, because this is where the person develops their own set of rules, morals, and guidelines for things that they would like to see in society. This may or may not align with the law. This is where we have human rights, diversity, and equality being the biggest driving factors behind this. And this is where the person will prepare to act and defend the principles, even if this means going against the rest of society. It's like one for all and all for one. So they're willing to pay consequences for their actions, such as imprisonment, disapproval, ostracizing, and even death. So huge examples that we've seen, and someone that we celebrated recently was Martin Luther King Jr. So went against almost the entire United States system at one point during the civil rights movement, but he was willing to be imprisoned. He was willing to risk his life for everyone to get equal rights, regardless of the color of their skin or nationality. So he was willing to lay it on the line for the benefits of everyone else. Another person is Gandhi. He was willing to lay his life on the line by fasting and lining up a whole bunch of people of India to march in front of the government body and ultimately get beaten to show and give exposure to the rest of the world, so that way it could stop their government system. John Q, which is a movie by Denzel. Shout out to Denzel for being dope. But this is where he like basically locks himself and his son into a hospital to make sure that his son gets procedures and medical attention because the hospital kept turning him away. He's willing to lay his life on the line as well as go to prison so that way he can make sure that his son was okay. Ultimately holds people hostage and stuff, but he was willing to lay it on the line. Another example would be like Mother Teresa. She like dedicated her entire life to the benefit of everyone else, regardless of what the world and what government bodies would have said. Any questions on Colbert? Okay. Question. Oops, text. So stage 4 to 6 is similar to the Hunger Games. If that's how you want to envision it, kind of. Meaning, yeah, if that's the ideology you want, yeah. Meaning Katniss Everdeen thought this was a bad move, went against the government. She would more have less started in 5 and then shot all the way up to 6. Her and Peeta. Those that have watched the Hunger Games. Yeah, I didn't make that connection, but yes, helps a lot. Exactly. Yeah, good connection to Dean. No. But 4 is about the perfect world. Yes. Yep. Yes. 4 is what you'd like to do, but you ultimately succumb to the government anyway. 5 and 6 is where you rise up and say, not today, my friends. All right. So no questions. We'll rip on to Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. Hype. All right. So the first one, trust v mistrust, 0 to 1. And this is where the child begins to gain confidence and trust based on the feedback from their caregiver. Meaning, whatever their caregiver says and does around them gives them a sense of what their environment looks like. And if they don't have a lot of support around them or don't get their needs met, they start having a sense of mistrust for everybody and questionable of what people may do regarding their needs. However, if a caregiver is always there for them, that is where they fall on the trust. And they try to keep a close connection to their caregiver, but like I said, if there's no reciprocity, the kid ends up having maladaptive attachment, and that's totally a different road. So Erikson wanted to divide it up into positive and or success and negative and or failure, depending on how you want to look at it. So positive is where they fall on the trust side of things, and that is where they have a sense of security and confidence in their ability to maintain safety. And a child is able to understand what a caregiver will do and that they will be there for them and take care of their needs. The negative and failure side is when a child will have a sense of fear around the world and can have heightened anxiety based on the fact that they have to rely on themselves at such a young age, and the child is unsure whether they can trust their caregiver to take care of their needs. So then they start developing and doing whatever they feel is necessary for their own needs, which then leads us into autonomy v shame, which is 1 to 3 years old. So this is when the child begins to roam away from the caregiver / parents, depending on what's the system set up. Yet they'll come to them whenever safety is needed, or they'll like feel secure when they're around them. So the client begins to assert independence by walking away from the caregiver, but ultimately keeps them close and will roam back to them shortly after. So this is where the child on the autonomy side starts to make decisions for themselves and have some type of freedom. Shame is where they're not able to make decisions for themselves. Their caregivers are overbearing, or they just are indecisive on decision making. So success here is when the child gains more confidence in their ability to do for them And the child is able to start having a sense of trust in themselves as well as a trust in their caregiver. Somebody that has freedom and autonomy ultimately ends up becoming more assertive and confident in relationships later. Failure is when the child is anxious and unsure of their abilities and may rely on others for reassurance on what they should do or what they feel is comfortable. When the child questions what they're doing and becomes dependent on others to do it for them, and or they're not able to rely, so then they find somebody that can ultimately do it, which is the formation of like codependency and abusive relationships in the future. But I digress. So then we have initiative versus guilt, which is 3 to 6. And this is when the child begins to plan activities for themselves and will begin to share / play with other children. And the child begins to engage and play with others and attempt to seek out friendships. They will start completing tasks on their own to developing a sense of accomplishment. So if you think of the word initiative, initiative means effort outside of themselves. And thus success here is when the child develops a sense of confidence in their ability to engage, develop peer relationships, and a sense of connection, as well as feeling that their needs are recognized or their insight is valuable. Thus will start being able to do tasks and projects on their own. Failure here or negative here is when they question their ability to engage with people. They may start to isolate or become angry since they're different from people. They may engage in some bullying type behavior and or be bullied. They be more anxious when engaging with people or have some type of depression early on with what they see and what they know and how they feel about themselves. And they'll depend on others to guide them, and they can believe that they're nuisances to people or that they're not worthy or they're bothering people whenever they need something. Which then leads us into industry versus inferiority. And the ages here we're looking at are 6 to 12. And this is when the child begins to develop a sense of pride around their accomplishments. They initiate projects and see them through completion. They seek out peer relationships based on similar interests to gain a sense of connection with others. Think of industry, bunch of assembly lines and people needing to work together to develop a sense of common goal. They'll begin to take on projects in particular interest area to advance their skill level or advance themselves. Success and failure here looks like success is when a child is able to make connections with others and take a sense of pride in the projects they complete. Confidence is increased, continuation of the task of desire, as well as they continue on their mission and become independent beings. They'll begin to feel productive and see a sense of drive when working on their goals. They'll get fulfillment from what they do, and they'll be hungrier than they've ever been towards accomplishing their goals. Failure, on the other hand, is when the child begins to feel less than others or inferior to their counterparts, or that they need to be on teams with other people that just specifically tell them what to do, and will have severe doubt around their abilities or what they're capable of doing, and thus just feel that they're a failure, and any sense of failure or resistance will result in them quitting. They'll feel isolated from people. They'll feel less than. They'll have low self-esteem, lack of confidence, and their anxiety will be through the charts whenever they need to do something for themselves and or develop a sense of self. Ego identity B, role confusion. This is where someone will seek out tasks that they normally would not do to begin to develop a sense of what works for them and who they want to be in their future. This is where they weigh out their strengths, their weaknesses, and past experiences to help allude to what they would actually want to try to do. So for example, let's say we have a kid that wants to start playing football. They play it and they're actually not really good at it, so they stop playing it. Or conversely, they play it, they're really good at it, so they're like, wow, I want to be a football player the rest of my life. So success here is when someone will identify a specific path of interest and they will get an idea of what like type of career, social group, economic situation that they want to strive for. And this is where they'll identify who they are and where they'd like to go in the future. Meaning, I want to be a social worker that does substance use services with this specific population for this long. And this is what I would like to do. Very specific mapped out goals. The failure end of the side is where someone becomes anxious and uncertain about what they want to do, and they rely on other people to tell them what they should do for themselves because they just question everything about themselves, and they have low self-esteem, and they will mold to any experiences or expectations other people have on them. This is what we like to call people that are kind of chameleons. They will adapt and overcome to any environment they're in. Some people tell them, wow, you should be a social worker. And then when they're in that environment, they're like, yeah, I want to be a social worker. And then other people would be like, wow, you'd be a good baker. So then they look into being a social work baker. So very flippant and very detrimental to overall identity in the long run. So then leads us into intimacy versus isolation, which is the ages of 18 to 40. And this is where someone will begin to seek out relationships or connections beyond their family. So someone will practice what they would like to see for themselves, meaning they may engage in a relationship with this particular person, or they may try this type of career or take courses in this subject area. And they may be like, oh, I don't like that. Oh, I like this, or I don't like that. So there's a lot of experimenting, or on the other side, isolating from people since they feel incompetent or less than other people. They tend to attempt to develop relationships and connections with people beyond their immediate family. However, it could lead to them becoming more codependent on their family, depending on the sense of connection they feel with other people. So, what does success look like here? This is when the person feels comfortable with seeking out and maintaining relationships. They can accept rejection from other people and see the lessons in the tragedy, and they're comfortable with the sense of commitment and can care for another human being. Failure, on the other hand, and when someone has a sense of doubt and they feel like they don't belong around people, and they lack of connection in areas they deem important, meaning they may want to have an intimate partner, but they're not able to sustain and maintain that. So then they feel like they're less than, or something's wrong with them. And then they may avoid intimacy at all costs. Even though they say they want it, they may say, well, that's not for me. Everyone's stupid. I'm just going to stay away from it. Generativity versus stagnation is the ages of 40 to 65. And this is where the person begins to establish their career and settle down with the family, or continue to isolate anyhow. But they develop a sense of being a part of something that is bigger than themselves, and they develop a family and or network of people that they show pride in being a part of. So success here is when someone will have a fulfilling career, family, and home life. They developed connections with people they're happy to know, and they're attempting to empower the next generation in the family or next generation of social workers. So failure here, and when someone does not value what they do, and they feel like they're not contributing to society. They lack a sense of self-esteem, confidence, and they have anxiety and depression around their situation, and they avoid any opportunity to be a part of the community because they feel like they're less than and that they don't meet the expectations that they once had. And then integrity versus despair is 65 years and older. And this is where the person starts to slow down productivity and begins to reflect on their life's work and accomplishments. Or the other side, their failures and lack of growth that they would like to see. So someone begins to reflect on their life and deem it worthwhile or like they could have done more. So success here is when someone feels like they've done all that they would like to have done, they've advanced their career field, and empowered / enabled other people to do the same. They take pride in their efforts, and they're just very happy about where they're at and where they're going. A failure here is when someone feels like they should have done more and they wasted their time and potential. The person may experience a lot of self-doubt, regret, and resentment. The mnemonic to remember the stages: trust, autonomy to initiate the industry, identify intimacy, and generate integrity. And those are all the first words for the stages. And the second bullet is the second part of all of the phases. So mistrust, shame, guilt, and inferiority can cause role confusion and make someone isolate from stagnation, which leads to despair. Remember, trust v mistrust, autonomy v shame, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, identity versus role confusion, intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, and integrity v despair. And then the ages, mnemonic starts at 0 and ends at 1. Stage 2 is between 1 and 3. Stage 3 starts at 3 and ends on the double, which is 6, 3 to 6. Stage 4, industry starts at 6 and breaks at 12, starts at 6, ends at 12. Stage 5, adolescence is when identity is confusing. Age 18 to 40 is a lovely time to isolate for stage 6. Stage 7, if you generate enough from 40 to 65, you can retire. Age at 65, you can have some integrity and avoid despair. So a little clever way to remember those. Any questions on good old Erickson's? Okay. So then we hop into our boy Freud. Sigmund, you long-winded man. But not impossible. So we'll go to psychosexual and then go to psychoanalytic, which contains the defense mechanisms. And then we'll get into the practice questions. And then we will figure out when the next question and answer study group for you guys will be. So let's rock this out. So the mnemonics to remember the stages for the psychosexual: onions and potatoes look great. Oral, anal, phallic, latent, genital. Old age prisoners love grapes. Oral, anal, phallic, latent, genital. So what is the basis of this theory? So Freud believed personality developed through a series of childhood stages where pleasure-seeking energies of the id become focused on certain areas. So they're sexually sensitive, which will be using the term libido. So if certain issues are not resolved at their appropriate stage, fixations can occur. So fixations are a persistent focus on earlier psychosexual stages, meaning some regression. So the first stage, oral stage, 0 to 1. Think of a little baby. A lot of what their interactions are for and do are for survival via their mouth. So the infant primarily focused on the source of survival, so interactions occur through the mouth. So the rooting and sucking reflex are important. So if you go up to a child and put anything near their mouth, they'll start doing a sucking motion because that's all they know and communicate through. So the mouth is vital for feeding, and the infant derives pleasure from oral stimulation through gratifying activities such as tasting and sucking. So since the infant is entirely dependent on the caretaker, who are responsible for the feeding, the child develops a sense of trust and comfort through oral stimulation. So the primary conflict here that we're looking at is the weaning phase, okay? Getting the child to stop from breastfeeding and become less dependent on caretakers for survival. Fixation here, or failure here, would be when a child and individual has a dependency on the substances or relationships and or abusive behavior when their needs are not being met in future relationships. Thus, fixation in the oral stage can lead with problems to drinking alcohol, smoking, eating, nail biting, or finger picking. So if we see any of these, there's likely an oral fixation within their routine or rearing. So then the next stage, the anal stage, is from 1 to 3. So what is behind this one? So Freud believed that the primary focus of libido was on controlling bladder and bowel movements. And thus, the major conflict, or the primary conflict, is toilet training. So the child has to learn how to control his or her bodily needs or function. So developing this control leads to a sense of accomplishment for them and independence. So success is dependent on the way in which a parent and or caregiver reacts or approaches toilet training. Therefore, parents that utilize in praise and or rewards for using toilet at the appropriate time and encourage positive outcomes, as well as help the children feel comfortable and confident while trying. So no brainer here. The more positive and encouraging you are, the more likely positive results will happen and more confident the child will be in the long term. aka positive self-talk. So positive experiences during this stage serve as the basis for people to feel confident and comfortable and confident, productive, creative adults. Failure would have the parents provide punishment, discouraging words, degrading words, and even shame/ridicule for not using the toilet. So that's how we typically create fixations here. Said in less wonky terms, harsh environments around toilet training can cause people to be more anxious or lack confidence when engaging in new behaviors, which can be predicated on particular people. We have a bad relationship with one caretaker, they're a lot more rude to you. You'll be a lot less likely to engage new behaviors around that person rather than someone that makes you feel comfortable and confident in yourself. So fixation here is when inappropriate parental responses result in two negative outcomes. We have people that are too lenient, and then we have people that are too strict. People that are too lenient can lead to an anal, explosive personality. So think of explosive. If we threw an explosive, this person's going to have a affect that is more messy, wasteful, or destructive, and is easily angered. Think about throwing a grenade. It explodes, everything goes everywhere. So anal, explosive. However, if the parents are too short, we can have anal retentive. So if they're too strict, meaning the person is stringent, orderly, rigid, excessive, overly controlling. So you've probably heard the term, this person is super anal about everything. That's just them hyphenating it rather than saying anal retentive. They're just anal, meaning they're super structured, care about that way too much, and they just get wild. Which then leads us into the phallic stage. So the phallic stage is from the ages 3 to 6. And the primary focus of libido is on genitals, because the child begins to start seeing like, wow, what's this? And they start playing with it. So if you've seen someone from the ages of 3 to 6, they start playing with the private part without even knowing that it's stimulating pleasure. So this is where boys begin to view their fathers as rivals in competition for their mother's attention. which is often referred to as the Oedipus complex, meaning they want to possess their mother and desire to replace their father. So think of like Norman Bates, which was like a serial killer movie where Norman got jealous of mom's boyfriend, kills mom's boyfriend, subsequently kills mom, so that way he can be around her and actually transforms himself into her. But super fixated on his mom. So Freud thought a male child who sees a naked girl for the first time believes that their penis was cut off. Thus, the child fears to be around the father because they will do the same to him. Castration anxiety is what we typically coin that fear as. Which then leads us into the electrocomplex, which is the female desires her father, but notices that she doesn't have a penis, which causes her distress. So the woman, or the young woman, like girl, resolves her anxiety by repressing the desire for her father and substitutes her wish for a penis with a wish for a baby, something that's possible for her, and starts to develop a connection with mom, even though she may not want one. So stage 4 is latent. So think of the word late. People start to develop a sense of causing their libido to be late because it's suppressed, because they want to develop social relationships with people and a sense of connection. These are the first connections that people make outside their family. Starts at 6 and goes to puberty. So think 6 is typically the age of school. So you start developing relationships at school. So this involves the child evolving into school and getting more acquainted with people around similar interests. And the main thing here is it's a time for exploration, and their sexual urges are repressed and aren't really active. So the main conflict here is that you're trying to develop a social network or a peer group to start gaining a sense of self, meaning you stop thinking about sexual urges and you start thinking about hanging around other people for the sake of getting a connection with them. So fixation here is like when someone has immaturity or an inability to form relationships as an adult. So if someone feels rejected or is too anxious to try new things, they're just going to isolate from people and think that they're going to never be good enough and that they should just quit. So stage 5 is the genital, the very last stage. And what does this look like? So this is where the onset of puberty happens, and the libido that was once suppressed just leaps out and becomes overwhelming. So this is right around the age that people start experimenting and doing sexual actions to themselves as well as with other people. So the individual develops a sense of sexual interest in the opposite sex and or the same sex, depending on what their preference is. And where sexual energy was basically individual driven, this is a sense of connection for the welfare of others. And someone has to have success in the previous stages to have a well-balanced and healthy relationship that they can engage in. And Freud believes that ego and superego were formed by the younger children. So the id, little quick synopsis, but I'll get deeper into it later on. The id is like the demands and the immediate satisfaction for the most basic needs. So id for ID is like the impulsive demands, and those are the impulsive ideas that are the main driving factors. If you want to think of it as like a villain or evil, the other continuum is like ego, which attempts to find balance between the id and superego. It tries to keep it in check. This is the middle ground, which then leads us into the superego or the superhero that attempts to serve the best interest of others and finds it difficult to think of themselves. So we have the id, which is all entirely individual driven, that is in conflict with the superego or the superhero. And then we have the ego, which is the middle ground, which then leads us into the psychoanalytic theory, which is seen as a client as just a product of their past, and treatment involves dealing with repressed or so like catharsis, and personality arises based on resolving issues within their past and what they've experienced. So then we have the three levels of the mind: the conscious mind, the pre-conscious mind, and the unconscious mind. So the conscious mind are things that consist of thoughts that are focused in the here and now, and our attention is currently on those. So for example, you may be listening to my voice, you may be feeling how your room is either hot, cold, or medium. You may be having a blanket on and think, wow, this blanket's fuzzy, or you may have a shirt that is soft or rough, or many different things. These are things that we can readily tap into and say, wow, this chair is kind of soft, or wow, this chair is kind of rough, type deal. And so this is all the information that we're paying attention to at this given moment. These are our thoughts and perceptions that are easily accessible at all times. So there's a small amount of mental information we know about and is actually on your mind. So a way to remember this is that it's wake and fully functional. You're conscious, like you're up and roaming around. Pre-conscious is the information outside of the client's attention, but is readily available if needed. So thoughts and feelings can be brought to the consciousness with some effort and could be made aware of if we need or want them to. Such as like my best friend's phone number, how to change a tire if I need to, how to make a YouTube video, how to explain psychoanalytic theory, etc. Like these things aren't on your mind 100% of the time, but if you need to, you can snap a finger and tap into it pretty quick. So pre-conscious is not awake, but with effort can be. And then unconscious, think about somebody that's literally incapacitated or sleeping, are the thoughts or feelings, desires, and memories in which people have no awareness to that influences their day-to-day life. This can either be trauma-related, health condition-related, or just simply life-related, meaning things are unaware and cannot become aware of without great effort. And this is where a lot of psychoanalytic lies. People try to breathe the unconscious into the conscious to make efforts go forth. So things are often too frightening or painful for someone to acknowledge. So this is where a lot of trauma treatment began and is going to, is you need to have people aware of their patterns so that way they can change them. So the little phrase that you can remember about the unconscious is sleeping, so I have no idea what is going on around me. Your thoughts and experiences are sleeping and have no clue why they're influencing your current behavior. Which then leads us into the three levels of personality: id, ego, superego. So id operates at an unconscious level according to the pleasure principle, meaning I want it, I'll do what I want. And then ID for I do, or impulsive decision, because these are all your impulses. So this one goes basically for gratification and satisfying any needs that it can at any means necessary. So this is instinctual energy that contains biological urges such as impulse towards survival, sex, and aggression. Very limbic system driven. And this is present at birth. So it breaks it down into survival or destructive urges. So survival helps the person survive life-sustaining activities such as breathing, eating, and sex. Sex here is for reproductive matters. And energy creates libido. So these survival are essential for sustaining life. Destructive are forces that are to eliminate chances of life, such as self-harm, or someone may have unconscious thoughts to die. but their life instinct repels these. So people may have SI, but they have too many protective factors to let it rip and tear. So examples of the id could be like a baby will cry to get their needs met, or a young child will have a fit for something they want. Someone eats a donut at work, even though they may be on a diet. They don't think about it on the moment. They just act on their limbic. So a teenager wants a pair of shoes. They can't afford them. Instead of saving the money, they just steal them. Very impulsive. The other level is ego. And a way to remember this is evaluate before go, or let it go. And this is the component that manages the conflict between id and the constraints of the real world. Meaning, the ego's goal is to satisfy the needs and demands of the id, or the impulsive decisions. And some of the parts are unconscious, whereas other are preconscious or conscious. The ego operates on the reality principle, or basically the awareness that gratification has to be delayed in order to accommodate the demands of the real world. Bill wants something, he can't just go in and kick someone's door down and take it. So the ego's role is to prevent the id from gratifying its impulses in socially inappropriate ways. So there's two types of ego reactions: egosyntonic and egodystonic. So behaviors that are in sync or syntonic are socially acceptable according to the ego. Okay? Guilt-free because the ego is comfortable with the decision. Egodystonic is dis-in-sync, meaning it's out of sync with what you would normally expect. So it's not socially acceptable according to the ego. There's guilt because the ego is bothered by it. So begs the question to, what is ego strength? And that is the ability of the ego to effectively deal with the demands of the id, ego, superego, and reality. So too much ego strength, or refrain, leads to rigid or stubborn behaviors. Too little has someone feeling torn or flippant, and when placed in a decision, they just have no clue what they need to do. So two examples here. As a teenager realizes he doesn't have enough money to buy a desired item, so he buys a cheaper alternative. Ego leads him away from theft and leads him to a positive decision. Person two, person sees a donut in the break room at work and decides whether they want to stick to their diet or eat one. Or they may eat a smaller piece or have a small stack instead. Meaning, they still had a decision and fed the id, but it was a more positive way of doing it. Superego leads on the philosophy of like, you can't have it, or tries to save the moral and values of the person. Think of a superhero. And this is the moral component of personality, as it contains all moral standards learned from parents and the society. It forces the ego to conform not only to reality, but the idea of morality. Hence, it causes individuals to feel guilty whenever they go against society rules. So it operates on the morality principle, which is the gauge of right and wrong that are accepted by an individual or group influenced by their parents and society. And then the superego is made up of the conscience given to a person by their parents, caregiver, and society, indicating right and wrong. Which then leads us into the ego ideal. The ego ideal is the idea that people have of what they should be like, given their parents or society. So, example of this: everyone's in your family is a lawyer, so like you feel like you need to become one, or everyone in your family worked in a hospital, so you feel like you have to, or everyone in your family had 3 kids, so you feel like you need to. Type deal, you just try to create tradition to not let them down. Conscience, on the other side, is our view of what's considered wrong. You can think of it as an internal set of rules When we break out the rules, the superego considers our behavior to be bad, which can lead to feelings of guilt or remorse. Information about the conscience is viewed as bad by our parents and society. An example of such behaviors is stealing, premarital sex if you're in a religious family, substance use, adultery, etc. Which then leads us into the defense mechanisms, which are unconscious things that can help us protect ourselves from things that are happening, which is used to protect from fears as well as perceived harm. So the id, ego, and superego are the main driving forces of these. And they're automatic, involuntary, and usually unconscious reactions to behaviors that are deemed unacceptable or that we have fear of punishment around. Which then leads us to branch them into different categorical ways. So we have primitive defense mechanisms, and these are often predicated on a mistake or inaccurate representation of reality. And they're learned during childhood and may persist into adulthood. So the first one, denial. And this involves blocking external events from awareness. If someone is in a situation and it's too much to handle, the person will refuse to experience it. They can either A, outright refuse to admit or recognize something that occurred, or B, accept responsibility yet minimize the impact. So 3 examples that we have here. Someone who smokes cigarettes may refuse to admit that smoking is bad for health by citing a range of facts to back it, i.e., my grandfather lived to 90 and he smoked every single day. Example number 2. A person is unable to pick up subtle signs that his relationship is over and may minimize his feelings after it is ended, citing, "Wow, this is kind of dumb. I didn't even care about this person anyhow. I'm just going to do me." Which then leads us in the 3rd example, failing the ASWB exam and saying the exam was not even that hard. I just did not even try. I didn't even want to be licensed at this moment. Defense mechanism number 2, reaction formation. Key emphasis on react, because we react in a different formation than we want to. It's typically the opposite. So unacceptable feelings are expressed as the opposite. Phil wants to pick up this chair and put it through the mirror in front of him, but instead he just says, "Wow, I look really nice in the mirror." So taking up the opposite feelings or impulses to avoid social consequences. So example number 1. A woman who is dissatisfied with her boss compliments her boss on a job well done. Wants to tear the boss apart, gives her a compliment instead. Example number 2. A boy likes a girl, yet ignores her and acts uninterested when she is around him. Meaning, you should act affectionate like you like the person rather than doing demeaning things. Example number 3. A man is angry at his brother and wants to kill him. Instead, he hugs him, does the opposite, shows affection rather than ending life. Example number 3, key emphasis on the word project, because you're projecting, think of a projector, goes from the camera onto a bigger surface. You're that camera and you're putting your behavior or your feelings on someone else. So you're propelling things away from you. So example number 1, you're feeling overwhelmed and you say, "Dang, it looks like Kim is overwhelmed." Example number 2, you hate someone and say, "Jesus, this person doesn't like me at all. I don't understand why not." Example number 3, cheating on a significant other and accusing them of the behavior when you were the one that were cheating. Putting your behavior or actions onto somebody else. Acting out. The individual copes with stress by engaging in actions rather than reflecting on the internal feelings. Example 1. Someone may attempt suicide for people to show concern. They don't really say that they're hurting or anything, so they just attempt suicide to show people the message anyhow. Someone may skip school to show that they hate school. They don't express, wow, I hate school. They just stop showing up. Example 3, Bill avoids his boss to show he hates his job. Rather than confronting the boss and saying, well, I'm done here, just avoid them. Regression, think of regress. We are going back to something different that we didn't really entirely envision or know. So what does that look like? We are confronted with an undesirable situation and we cope by reverting back to old behaviors in earlier developmental stages. 3 examples. Example 1, after the divorce of his parents, a 10-year-old wets his bed. 10-year-olds don't really wet bed, but this was so stressful for him that he reverted back to a younger age. Example number 2, someone is sick and will cling to their mother such as a baby would. Example 3, someone is stressed out at work and begins to suck their thumb. Sucking the thumb is an old behavior, but in stressful situations, it can be comforting for some people. Which then leads us into the less primitive one, which is more ambivalent relationship. Reality is recognized here and to a larger extent, even if it's avoided. So more kind of conscious decision-making type deal here. So what does that look like? Repression. So we press things down, meaning we don't acknowledge them. So unconscious defense mechanism employed by the ego by keeping disturbing or threatening thoughts from being conscious. So an example is someone who has severe childhood abuse may repress these memories and have difficult time forming relationships later on and not even know why. A young child exhibits repression when they are afraid of dogs but cannot remember any experiences that would make it so. Displacement, keyword on place. And this is where we take our frustrations and feelings out on something that is less threatening. Meaning, you'll have the telltale example of like kicking the dog and stuff like that, but not in this neck of the woods, because my examples are someone is mad at their girlfriend, so they yell at their young child. Example 2, someone did not pass their ASW exam, so when they get home, they punch pillow 100 times. Pretty systematic and kind of psychotic, but you might as well. And the other one, intellectualization. So think of the word intellectual, because you're trying to develop information on it rather than dealing with this. So this is the overemphasis on thinking when confronted with an unacceptable impulse. Rather than dealing with pain, you'll look up and focus on that content area in particular. So an example, a person was recently diagnosed with anxiety and will learn about all of the symptoms rather than expressing their feelings about the diagnosis. Or a person copes with the recent death of a parent by reviewing the process of grief. Or third example, someone will fail the ASWB exam and look up different content areas that they missed rather than reflecting on how failing feels. We said it all the time. People will fail and they'll just reach out and buy as much materials as they possibly can. They try to intellectualize their loss rather than tapping into the experience. Rationalization. Think about the word rational. Someone is trying to get rational about what is currently going on in their situation. So this is explaining an unacceptable behavior or feeling in an irrational or logical manner, avoiding the true reasons for a behavior, such as someone loses a job and says, I didn't like that job anyway. Or someone gets turned down for a day and says, I have a lot of things going on anyway, type deal. So you try to rationalize rather than actually say, wow, I took a loss. Number 5, undoing. you're trying to do something to make up for bad behavior and or thought. So like when something goes south, you try to make something more appropriate and okay on your end when the other person may not even know that that's something you're doing. So like after cheating on your boyfriend or girlfriend, you buy them a video game to make up for it. They may just think they're getting a nice gift, but in your mind, it's making you feel better about the cheating. Example 2, a husband may do the dishes after insulting his wife to make up for the behavior, doing something nice to undo the negative behavior that predicated it. So then we step into our mature defense mechanisms. And this is when someone has a healthy relationship with reality as well as their conscience. And reality is accepted even if it's not appreciated or appropriate within the person's mind or context. And someone may act out their behavior. So within this, we look at sublimation and think of the word sub because we're substituting something. So we're substituting a negative behavior in place of a positive behavior. And an example here is a man with a lot of anger starts working out. And someone who has a lot of frustration towards a parent may play violent video games to express their anger. Someone that wants to self-harm may start drawing on themselves. The other one is suppression, where they try to silence what's going on. And this is the voluntary or consciously avoiding thinking about disturbing thoughts or experiences temporarily. And what does this look like? While taking the ASWB exam, the person may forget the thought of like the loss of money it takes to do it or the potential loss of their job. Or like a woman stays at work to avoid fighting with their husband. She knows like, wow, if I stay away, then it'll be a lot better overall on us and gets it easier for the people to cope with it. Another one might be, well, I'm super hungry right now, but I need to finish this before I'm able to do it type deal. So you like suppress like your own needs and wishes for a specific task. Compensation is making yourself more appealing or compensating for a different behavior, meaning you may be overachieving in one area but super underachieving in another area. So an example of that is like someone isn't good at schoolwork, so they put all of their energy into sports to excel. Or a husband works a lot, so he buys his wife whatever she wants to make up for the absence of time. Or somebody that is not that good at structure or coordinating things or organizing things may overcompensate by performing well in another area, such as just like delivering the subject. Altruism is the benefit for everybody. So this is satisfying internal needs through helping others. Meaning, let's say I had past traumas and then I help people process their traumas. So like this is helping others from suffering similar feelings that you have experienced in the past or that you are currently going through. So for example, someone was bullied as a child and they started an anti-bullying campaign to prevent others from doing it. So another example is someone who lost a friend to cancer may start an organization to spread information on how to lower the risk of cancers. Internalization is when someone internally changes. So when someone will take the opinions, values, and feedback from others and change their identity or self around that. So an example of this, someone tells a person they're dumb and that they will never succeed in life. and regardless of what the person hears from others, they will feel like they're not good enough. And then identification is when someone's identity changes to fit an ideal role. You see something you like and you firmly believe in, and you begin to follow that role. So, for example, someone who likes Beyonce may start to dress and act like her. Or someone who has a close relative as a social worker may want to become one. So, key ways to remember these is that is an internal change or internal embedded thing, and identity is very different and can change almost daily. So there's our Freudian theory. Any questions on any of the theories that we went over today before we get into the question? And I'll get to that, Nicole, don't worry. And if you don't have any questions, just tap no. Thank you, bringing all things together like a string. I try my best. All right. So what is the difference between displacement and projection? So, whoops. Okay. So displacement, keyword on placing. And this is where you're typically placing an emotion. Projection can be an action or feeling. So displacement is a key thing here is that it's someone on something less threatening. So meaning I have a feeling and emotion that I have towards somebody that has some potential power on me, and then I express it on something that's less threatening. Projection is feelings and actions that I have, and I'm simply placing it onto somebody else for the sake that I don't want to admit that I have them. Displacement is you're placing your emotions and expressing them. Projection is not expressing them. It's just basically simply putting them onto somebody else or projecting them onto somebody else. Does that make more sense? I can give more examples if I need to. Yes, thanks. Okay. You're welcome. All right. Do you guys want me to keep recording and just do the questions and one at a time still? So we'll resume. So we have question 1. The social worker at a family agency is working with a couple and their 12-year-old son who has been skipping school to smoke marijuana. The parents report that they have tried putting their son in many different activities, yet he's not been interested in any of them. The boy reports that he feels like his parents are too much and they need to chill out. The boy reports that he has started to hang around people he feels comfortable around. What psychosocial stage of development is the boy in? Identity v. role confusion, industry versus identity, social conformity versus individual, or latent stage. And when you have your answer, just type the word fill into the chat. And then I'll open the poll. Well, I was going to say it's Phil, but we can go with chill. All right, I'll launch the poll. Bango. Do the split. Weep, weep, weep. Let's see if we can get everybody. You're welcome, Kim. I tried my best. I tried my best to change up information that is so hard to change. I mean, like, so hard to make different when you've done it. And if anyone needs more time, just type time, but if not, I'm going to crank the polls closed. Three people haven't voted. All right, I'll give 5 more seconds. All right, closed. Let's break her down. So we have a social worker at a family agency. It's working with a couple and their 12-year-old son. Skipping school to smoke marijuana. Parents report they put him in many different activities, wasn't interested. Feels like there's too much and they need to chill out, and that he has people that he's comfortable around. So identity v role confusion is 12 to 18. Industry versus inferiority is 6 to 12. Social conformity versus individual is not real. And then latent stage is Freudian theory. So the answer here is going to be A, identity v role confusion, because he's trying to find his identity and his parents aren't too excited for him. So that is the answer there. Next question. A social worker at an outpatient clinic is working with a 30-year-old female who was recently fired from her job. The woman reports that she feels like her boss never liked her and that her boss is just jealous of her. The woman reports that she expressed her frustration of being fired by throwing a chair through her office window to avoid from physically harming her boss. What defense mechanism best explains the woman's behavior? And when you have your answer, just type the word anger in the chat. All right, we'll open the polls. Did the mouse come out again? It's a good question. It hasn't come. I haven't heard it. But to be fair, I'm not really home during the week. My schedule is typically 8 a.m. all the way until 7 p.m. And then I come home and then do tutoring at like from 8 to 9 and then just do emails the rest of the night. So I haven't heard it yet, but it doesn't mean that it's not around still. Good question. I almost forgot it existed, honestly, but or if it even was that, it might have been our pipes, honestly, because we've been having like pipe issues too. But thank you for asking. I do not see question 2. Maybe he came out during the time you're at work. I know. He's sneaky if you did. Catherine, I'm not really sure. Everyone else can see the question, right, eh? I'd imagine. 6 of you have answered.
I think she's talking about on the email you sent us. It's not on that. I think that's what she's talking about.
Oh, yeah, I didn't copy the questions on the email yet. I'm surprised, actually. I might have not hit save when I typed them up. Heck, I don't know. I'll send it back out to you guys, though. Don't worry. That's a good catch. All right. So we have the majority think it's D and then 1 for each of the other options. So let's see. So social worker at an outpatient clinic is meeting with a 30-year-old female. Recently fired. Thinks she's better than her boss. And reports that she expressed her anger by throwing an office chair through the window rather than harming the boss. So we have denial, projection, reaction formation, or displacement. So she's not really denying it. She kind of was at the beginning when she said the boss is jealous, and then she tossed a chair through the window. So that's a little more pressing. So then we have it's not reaction formation because she didn't do the opposite of what she wanted to. She was angry and she reacted on that pretty quick. So which brings the question that Nicole asked pretty relevant here of what's the difference between projection and displacement? And remember, projection is putting your emotions and feelings onto somebody else. She did put her emotions on that chair and put it through the window, but ultimately she placed her anger onto something that was less threatening. She wanted to hurt her boss. She didn't hurt the boss because the boss is threatening. So she subsequently hurt a window that couldn't do anything back to her. So D would be the best answer there. So then question number 3. A social worker is meeting with a 10-year-old boy that was referred by his teacher for complaints of throwing objects across the room at other students. The boy reports that he finds his schoolwork simple and that he just wants to talk with other students. And when the teacher tells him no, he gets angry. What psychosexual stage of development best explains the boy's behavior? Phallic, latent, genital, acting out. And when you have your answer, type one positive thing about yourself in the chat. A. So we have someone that's caring, honest, confident, giving, and loving. All right. I can vibe with it.
Tutoring.
Yeah.
Tutoring every day.
All right, does anyone need more time? Okay. So the majority think it's B, some think it's D. Let's look at it. Social workers meet with a 10-year-old lad. Was referred to the teacher for complaints of throwing objects at other students. Boy reports he's bored and just wants to socialize with people. So phallic, latent, genital. So remember, phallic is where there's a genital fixation. Genital is where there's actually sexual acting out and being attracted to other people. And then we have latent, which is where the primary focus is on social interaction, then acting out, which is a defense mechanism from Freud. So we'll rule that guy out. And the answer here would be latent, because remember, the libido is late and then comes up in the genital stage to be expressed after. So question 4, a social worker working at a high school meets with a 16-year-old boy who is referred by his teacher for making fun of another classmate for messing up during a presentation. The boy reports that he feels super guilty and embarrassed for making fun of his classmate. The boy begins discussing how all of his friends are going to think he's a bully and how they will no longer want to be around him. The boy reports that he struggles with impulse and often finds himself getting into trouble. What stage of moral development best explains the boy's concerns? A, obedience and punishment presentation. B, conformity in interpersonal accord. C, authority and social order. D, social contract and individual rights. When you have your answer, type one positive thing about another person in the chat. So we have some beautiful, smart, confident, and hungry people. And the only dinner that we'll eat is a passing score. I can dig it. And if you need more time, simply type time into the chat. Okay. Poll has been launched. And if anyone needs more time, just jaunt about it. All right, 10 more seconds. Bingo. All right, majority think it's B, some think it's D. Let's look at it. Social worker working with a 16-year-old lad who was referred by a teacher making fun of a classmate during a presentation. Always highlight where they come from. He feels super guilty and embarrassed. Boy discussing how his friends think he's a bully. And how they'll no longer want to be around him. And he often finds himself getting into trouble. So remember, A is about people that are trying to avoid trouble at all costs. So that would be out. Authority and social order is about people that are looking for the societal rules and norms. So that's out. And that leaves us to social contracts. So that would be out as well. And then the answer would be conformity and interpersonal accord, because that's where the person's looking for information and resources within their friends, and they start acting based on what their friends think. So well done. So I have 6, so don't be alarmed. But let's see what we're looking at. Question 5. A child is 5 years old and has been having behavioral problems when engaging with their parents. The child will often demand their parents do things for them when it is not entirely possible. Last week, the child had an episode of anger in the grocery store because their parents would not buy them a teddy bear. Which cognitive developmental stage would you say this child is in? Say one thing that you're looking forward to next week in the chat when you have your answer. Nadine. I ain't mad at you. All right, Jacqueline, I see it. Not being sick anymore. T is trying to tackle weekly goals. Speedy week, no drama. Payday. All right. Anyone else? More study time, not being sick. Pulls open. Crank it out of the park. Okay, 9 people answered this one. We had some confident people this run. So I love it. 10 more seconds roll. Let the moonlight roll. Let the sunrise fall. All right, Pango. So everyone chose the same answer. Everyone. So we have a 5-year-old boy. He's been having behaviorals when engaging with the parents. Child will often demand things that are not entirely possible, so their cognition is a little wonky. Kid will have an episode in the grocery store because they wouldn't buy him a TED. So with this, remember, sensory motor is where the person is getting the environment based on what their senses say as well as what they're experiencing. So that's not going to be it. Formal is not going to be the correct answer because formal is where you're able to see cause and effect, set boundaries, as well as abstractly look at the world. So then we have concrete or pre-operational. Concrete is where we're able to see objects and be able to decipher and disseminate information about it. Pre-operational is where we're kind of wonky and expect different things that we're not able to entirely do. So with that being said, everyone chose the correct answer that time with pre-operational because that person's pre being able to think about things objectively. All right, so a social worker at an outpatient clinic, not client. That was me rushing and typing them today, so I apologize. Has been working with a 15-year-old boy for 1 month. The boy engaged in services per requirement of probation for stealing video games from the video game store. The boy has been working on impulse control with the social worker. In the most recent session, the boy asked the social worker what he should do when asking out a girl he likes. He explains to the social worker that if he asks out the girl, then they might not be friends anymore. Which cognitive developmental stage best explains the boy's thought process? Concrete operational, pre-operational, formal operational, or planning phase? And with that, type 1 goal besides passing the test that you have for 2019 when you have your answer. Find a new job. Pay off my daughter's car. All right, I see you. How about you pay my car too? No, I'm just kidding. No, mine's paid for, but that's crazy. Yours losing weight. All right. Only 3 people have their answer. Live a little. All right. I can dig it. Lose some weight. All right, we have 2 people that want to lose weight. Maybe this could be like a way for people to connect doing that too. Like I said, this is a community for y'all to strive, thrive, and survive. Move to Virginia. Huh. Eat more salad. Health. Health is wealth. New job. Okay. Upgrades coming soon. Mm-hmm. 10 more seconds. Okay. So we're torn between A and C. Let's look. Outpatient clinic with a 15-year-old boy. Boy engaged per requirement for stealing video games. So some impulse. In the most recent session, the boy asked what he should do when asking out a girl he likes, and he explained they may not be friends any longer if it doesn't work. Some cause and effect type jazz going on here. So planning phase is not one because that's a stage of change and it's not pre-operational. So that begs the question, is he concrete operational or formal operational? Concrete operational is being able to apply abstract and cause and effect based on objects. Informal operational is being able to do cause and effect on relationships and or situations. So with that being said, the best answer here is formal because he's able to formally make a decision based on that. And remember, the stages of formal operations start from 11 beyond. So that is the correct answer there. Any questions on any of the questions and or content? Because if not, I am going to turn off the recording. So type no in the chat if that is the case. No means you don't have any questions. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, let's close down shop.